Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to introduce our uh, guest speaker for today. Ángela Capeles is a marketing strategist, empathic leader, entrepreneur, and a doctoral candidate. She's the founder of Capeles Agency, a woman-owned boutique creative agency that specializes in building iconic and resilient brands through intentional branding and marketing initiatives. Throughout her 9 years of international experience, she's built B2C and B2B brands, developed digital strategies, and cross-channel content marketing initiatives, as well as created online and offline marketing campaigns, voter registration programs, and coordinated events in multiple industries, ranging from entertainment, hospitality, and luxury brands to nonprofits and government agencies. Angela takes great pride in having led marketing initiatives for major brands such as Carolina Herrera, the Mall of San Juan, International Hospitality Services, Taubman Centers, Marriott International, Hilton Hotels, Combat Global, Sheets, UGI, Saxon and Stump, Functional Movement Systems, Cape Privacy, WITF, and PGA Tour. Additionally, she teaches at Penn State and Simon University. She helps brands big and small, global and local, find their true, authentic expression, which is translated to the world through digital experiences. But before we begin our presentation, we would like to introduce our executive director, Chad Dion Lassiter, to provide brief remarks.
Thank you so much, Hector. Social justice, congratulations to all those who have organized this. Really excited to be in this space. Uh, Director Brothman is absolutely right that we will not have ASL. There are real, live, in the moment repercussions to a budget impasse. So extended apologies to those who need ASL. Also, the democratic landscape, the PHRC, and those of us who work in the Commonwealth, we are humbled and also fortunate that in this month of October, we'll get 3 paychecks. The federal government may shut down, and there will be some people who may not experience what we're experiencing. Nonetheless, we continue to soar for justice. Thank you for all of those of you who are in this virtual beloved community space who avail yourselves. Just think about the title. We are all Latinos, diversity among Latino cultures, capitalizing on our collective strength. It reminds me of the 7 years that I've been in this position when I first started this position 7 years ago, and I'll conclude with this. Norman Bristol Cologne had a Latino conference, and it was called 1 Million Strong, and that number has continued to grow. And that's the hallmark and the beauty of our diversity and our democracy. And in Pennsylvania, is that we are, in fact, a kaleidoscope. And the Latino population has economic power, political power, and someday, I'll be 53 October 5th. Someday I look forward to seeing a woman president, but also a Latino president. And so without further ado, excited to be here. Hector, thank you for organizing this along with your colleagues who make up this committee. And to Angela, we are excited to have you in this space for your presentation. This will live on our PHRC YouTube page. And so once again, welcome and looking forward to being here and being present and learning from what I know will be an amazing presentation. Thank you.
So without further ado, Ms. Capeles, you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here. I want to confirm that all of you can see my presentation. Yes? Perfect. Okay. As before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for having me here. Huge thank you to the PA Human Relations Commission for creating a space so important for this conversation and for thinking of me for leading this conversation. Hector, thank you so much. As you know, we'll be talking about our Latinidad and how we can capitalize on our collective strength. Initially, we were meeting a couple of weeks ago, so if you're here once again, thank you for being part of this space and this conversation. Before I get started, I do want to share that the views and perspectives that I share today are my own, shaped by my personal journey as an entrepreneur, educator, and Latina, and they do not represent the official positions, policies, or opinions of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. If you don't know me, I know Hector just mentioned a couple things about me. I'm not going to bore you with that. I just want to highlight that I'm Boricua de pura cepa, born and raised in Puerto Rico, and Pennsylvania has become my second home since 2015, and I'm forever grateful. I'm the founder and CEO of Capeles Agency, a boutique marketing agency transforming visions into movements from our communities. I'm also a professor at Penn State University and Siemens University, and I've appointed myself as a black belt in salsa dancing. Así que if you see me dancing, I expect you to save a dance for me. I love our Latino heritage and culture, and I try to talk about it every single day. Why are we here? We've heard so many things over the last few years about Latinos. It's obviously Hispanic Heritage Month, and both the Human Relations Commission and the governor's administration have made it clear that we need to prioritize and honor our Latino culture and heritage. I'm very excited for this conversation. I have ambitious goals for today. By the end of our sessions, I'm hoping that you will be able to, one, reconnect with our Latinidad if you're Latino, and if not, to learn about our impact in numbers. Two, I want us to be able to recognize and articulate our diversity and our power as a competitive advantage. And three, I want us to be able to discuss high-level strategies for our Latino community engagement and how can we use our positions of power to make change across the nation. We want to make sure that this is a safe space for all of us who are here. It's possible that we're going to have tough or complex conversations. So if you feel triggered or uncomfortable at any time, feel free to step out. No issues with that. Take care of yourself first. I also want to say that by you being here today, you're agreeing to, one, stay engaged, two, speak your truth, three, experience discomfort when it's, happening, listen for understanding if we're sharing our perspectives or journeys, honor confidentiality, accept non-closure. So whatever it's shared here, it stays here, but whatever it's learned here, it should go out with all of us so that we can start making change regardless of our role. We're no strangers to conversations that are being had about how Latinos are in this nation. This is not something new. It's been happening since the beginning of times. It could be sad and disappointing, but today I invite each of you to reframe the way we see Latinos, the way we see our community, and the way we see our collective work. So today I invite you to see our power, what we bring to the table, and I want us to talk about next steps so that we can own and rewrite our narrative. So before I go into specifics, I do like to share some important data that will help us reframe how we think about Latino influence in the US. As a former journalism major student back in the day, I learned that we can say whatever we want, but there's power in numbers, in data, in facts and evidence. So we'll see what story our numbers are currently telling. So if we look at the data as of the latest census, we can see that across the US, we have about 332 almost million people. And when we're looking at those numbers, we see that first we have white alone, almost 62%, and then we have Hispanics on the second level for almost a 20%. So what this is saying, not to brag or anything, but if we look at these numbers and the projections, the future is definitely Latino. It's also projected that by 2044, the majority of the US population will be non-white. So what does this mean? That we have to strive for diversity and inclusion. The numbers are changing, our communities are changing, and we can shape what our country can look like for generations to come. Again, these are not just numbers. When we're thinking about the impact of those numbers within the Latino community specifically, we can see that about 65.2 million are Latinos as of 2023. And this makes us the nation's largest racial or ethnic minority. Again, 20% of the population. And this is amazing numbers and data to talk about because it represents a huge economic shift in American history, economy, and culture. So if we look at those 331.4 million people across the nation, from all of the different states, we have 13 states that have over 1 million Hispanics residents. And obviously, one of those is Pennsylvania, leading the way. So let's think about what this means specifically for Pennsylvania. If we're thinking about numbers and Hispanics in our communities, we can see that the top Hispanics populations in the US are comprised by Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Salvadorans, Dominicans, and Cubans, and we have additional populations. So if we're looking at that, at least 1 million people are living in the US in 2021, regardless of their specific heritage. If we're thinking about the share of Hispanics in the US who speak English proficiently, that has also increased. As of 2021, we can see that 72% of the US Hispanics ages 5 and older either spoke only English or they spoke English very well, and that was higher than 2010. If we're looking about the majority of the US Hispanics in the US, they're also US citizen, contrary to some of the information that we've been listening about. In 2021, which could probably be way higher right now, about 81% of Hispanics living in the country were US citizens. If we're thinking about most Hispanic immigrants who have lived in the US, they've been here for almost a decade minimum. This also talks about the history and the legacy that they continue to bring here. And when we look at PA's composition and we kind of like focus in and zoom in, we can see that from those 13 million people, we have Hispanics and Latinos in that third rank. So that also talks about the power in numbers. We're here to stay, we have a voice, and we can do so many things together. If we continue to zoom in a little bit more, we can see that from Pennsylvania, there are specific cities that have really large number of Hispanics doing amazing work. We see Reading, we see Hazleton, we see Allentown, Lebanon, Lancaster, Philly. There are so many other ones that are increasing with our community. So this means that the growth in the Hispanic population across the state accounts for more than 50% of the state's population growth in the last 2 decades. So if we're thinking about this number, which is huge, let's talk about Hispanics and Latino purchasing power just for one, so that we can see if we don't want to talk about Latinos as something that we should be doing, at least let's think about them as a financial or an important decision that you should make if your company or if your government wants to continue to make change and impact Latinos. Earlier today, before I spoke, there was conversations around the Pennsylvania Latino Convention. I also want to talk a little bit about that briefly. I've had the opportunity to participate more than once. And if you haven't been there, let me tell you the energy of seeing amazing Latinos who are doing amazing things across the state and the nation. It's something out of this world. It's always nice to remember and see that we're more than numbers, we're more than stereotypes, and some of the conversations that we're having with decision makers across the state and the nation, it's really important because we're talking about healthcare, education, representation of our communities, and we continue to talk about how we continue to grow across the state and the nation and how we're here to stay. 2 years ago, when the convention was held in Harrisburg at the Hilton, I remember that the president of Highmark Whole Care talked about Latinos in numbers, and she shared a phrase that kind of like blew my mind, and she talked about how your zip code determines your well-being. And I felt that was so impactful and also so sad, but it's a reality. And what I want us to have, today as part of these conversations is to challenge that notion that we are just a zip code or where we live. We are more than that, and we can use that to our advantage and benefit. So what I want us to do today is think about creative ways in we can better our communities when we work together and not in silos. Again, very, very important. If you haven't had the opportunity or if you're looking for ways to connect and plug in with the work that other Latinos are doing across the state, please let's have a conversation because there's so many opportunities for you right now. when I hear things like that phrase about the zip code, it makes me think about this phrase. And I typically use it a lot when I'm talking about equity work through branding and marketing, but it really applies to what we're discussing here today. And I think this is true for this case. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. And I think this is a powerful phrase because it's true in both sides. If we're thinking, other people cannot see us for who we are because they've never been a Latino, they've never been in our shoes, they've never endured our trauma, our experiences that we face every single day. They do not know what it feels like to be the other. And it goes the same in the opposite direction. We sometimes limit ourselves based on those preconceived notions or on the stories that our family tells us. And today, when we look at the data, I want us to look at the impact and I want us to use that to guide our collective future. So if we're looking at this from even like a marketing standpoint, if we're talking about government agencies or companies or nonprofits, we usually develop content or initiatives and services based on assumptions that we make for those communities, but we need to look at the data and numbers to see who is actually in the community and what do they actually need. So what I'm inviting you to do is that in your position of power, you use this information to create change. We want us to humanize our work and to make sure that we're thinking about the betterment of our community. So when I think about our presence and growth nationwide, I think about key areas where we by far win, according to me. I'm splitting those in three main areas. One, economic dominance, two, cultural influence, and three, political representation. But there are so many other ones. We can talk about media and language and so many other things. But if we're talking about economic dominance, 4.1 trillion GDP, which is gross domestic product. We're the fifth largest economy globally. And as we continue to grow, that number, it's going to be even bigger. We have 224 billion discretionary spending power. We have 71% of US population growth since 2022. There's so much data around how much the number of Latina entrepreneurs are winning across the board as well. So when we're thinking about the economy, we are here to make things better and we have the capital to prove it. Two, cultural influence. It's no surprise that we talk about Latinos and we think about artists like Bad Bunny, Karol G, Ricky Martin. Like there's so many things that other people are doing and it goes beyond that. We have over 61.1 million strong Latinos and growing that are expanding all the things that we can do. We have around 19.5% of the US population driving innovation across industries. It's amazing to see Latinos holding amazing positions of power across tech, legal, politics, media, so many people doing amazing things. Like I said, it's projected that we will become the majority between the 2040s and 2050s, that the non-Hispanic white population is projected to decrease by 2060. So all of these things means that we have the power, we have a lot of influence, and we need to start thinking about it in that way. It's not that what people are taking from us, is that we have all of this and we need to create our own momentum and space. When we think about political representation, we have around 580K eligible voters in Pennsylvania alone. Imagine what that means like in 20 years when our population becomes the majority minority. We will have more than a say in what happens with our country, with the policies and the laws that impact our communities across the board. Our youngest demographic with the longest term impact, we have Latinos, like I said, in every single space, making amazing change. So when we're thinking about our numbers and our power, we do have collective strength. We're not capitalizing our strengths enough, and we need to start shifting the narrative. I talk about data a lot because I think it's very important and it paints the picture. I think sometimes we see the numbers in silos and we don't think about the power that they carry. And today, like I said, my goal is, if you don't take anything else from this presentation, is we have power and we have the numbers. We need to make change. And yes, the data is not the only thing. It's our people, but the data is going to help us make that business case for us. When we lead with culture, which is so important within the Latino community, we lead with everything. We lead with culture, we lead with integrity. We talk about traditions and legacy. I wanted to share a little bit about our artists who are leading the way in so many different areas. I cannot have enough space here to share all of the amazing people doing great things. I wanted to use some of the recent mainstream items that really speak about the power that we have. So, for example, if we talk about Bad Bunny, he became the Spotify's most streamed artist globally, not just in Latino categories, but overall across the globe. And one of the things that I'm more excited about his work is that he demonstrated that he could revolutionize the Latino market power. And people used to joke about that. And he said, I'm sorry what you think, but like I can be me and I can make it to the top. And he did. So think about what these represent. Think about if we can use and adopt that same mentality and confidence and energy and say, I can become the primarily global streaming artist by singing and speaking in my language, and I can make people follow that. And I can become the first global stream artist by only talking about the things that are near and dear to my heart and talk about culture and power, oppression, representation. It's amazing. His world's hottest tour a couple years ago also became the highest grossing tour by a Latino artist in history, selling out stadiums across the US and so many other venues. But the strategic insight that this is saying is that we're not translating Latino culture for mainstream consumption. What we're doing is making sure that they follow along with us. And if we talk about his latest album and tour, it also speaks about that. And now we just learned I think a day or two ago, that he's the headliner for the Super Bowl. We have a Latino, we have a Boricua performing in Spanish in one of the top most watched sports, American football, and such an important event. So, what does this mean? We carry the power, we carry the numbers, we can make it everywhere. Um, a few weeks ago, I heard a phrase that it said, if you don't have a seat at the table, it's probably because you're on the menu. And I was like, oh my God, that is so true and so terrible. And it hit me hard. But at the same time, I think this industry shift, it's literally the result of that phrase. I don't have a seat at the table, so I'm going to create a new table. And if you don't have the space, I'm going to make it. So what we're seeing right now is that the Latino community has so much momentum. We have a strategic shift. We're not seeking inclusion in what has been done or existing markets. We're creating new markets and we're demanding space, and we have the numbers to back it up. If we talk about Encanto becoming Disney's most successful animated film in years by centering authentic Colombian family dynamics and traumas and colors. If we talk about West Side Story, and it's been reimagined and kind of like people come back to it time after time. So what we're seeing here is that our cultural components that are so important to who we are and our identity, they directly translate into economic influence and power. So when we lead with culture, we lead with consumption patterns, we lead with integrity, we lead with new ideas and innovation. We redefine what's possible for our community. And like I said, we're not following market trends. So what I want you to get out of this is, I do not want us to continue to go with this narrative that we can do this and we can do that and blah, blah, blah. We can do that, and our Latino community is showing that we can do that and more. So for every sector represented in this room, what I want to share with you is Latino authenticity generates revenue. So again, if you're not doing it because you want to or out of the kindness of your heart, the Latino community is here to stay, and you could capitalize and maximize the impact that you can have, or you don't and you can miss out. So what we can do is use our power to make change. And again, like I said, we have our artists and amazing people in positions of power demonstrating that we can do so. So we've talked about some numbers and how those look like across the nation and specifically in PA. So now I want us to talk a little bit more about understanding what is our Latinidad, what makes us unique, what are some of those challenges, and then how can we use that combined with the success stories of our Latinos making great changes across the nation and the globe, and then find our own unique recipe or formula for capitalizing and uniting on the things that makes us great. So if you haven't heard the word Latinidad before, that's essentially our Latino-ness. It's the condition of being Latino, a sense of cohesiveness that we have across all of us who are Latinos in the community. It definitely includes our identity, but also talks about our experiences, that we could have elements that connect us together, our Latinidad, but at the same time, we can all be very unique and specific because we're so layered. We have different identities and we have different attributes or identities that we can say, I do feel part of this group, but not for this one. When we're thinking about our Latinidad, like I said, it's so complex and all of you already know that. I mean, when we talk about humans in general, we're so complex. So imagine when you keep adding different layers or things. But what makes us so strong, it's our identity, our complexity, how layered we are, our traumas and our experiences. And the best way for us to understand how diverse we are and what we want and what we need is to be able to know better our community. So when we're thinking about the numbers that I share with you across the nation, I have access to this report. It's pretty amazing. It's talking about the state of the Hispanic American consumer. Obviously, as a marketing person, I'm very interested in seeing, our purchasing power and how the messaging resonates. But it was really interesting to share with all of you how we're seeing right now the consumer landscape for Latinos across the nation. And it's very specific and it's structured in these 5 core areas. We have Latinos who are Hispanic first and forever. That means people who are typically first-generation immigrants, that they maintain and keep our cultural knowledge and heritage. They maintain heavily use of Spanish language, and they have very deep connections to their countries. These are often the people that try to do a lot of work and being, our own cultural ambassadors, if you say. We have the bicultural and content. This is people that feel comfortable in both languages and in both worlds. I'm okay if I'm in Puerto Rico, but I also feel okay and I can adapt if I'm in the US. So this means that they use Spanish when it's needed, but they can also use English and use it as an advantage depending on where they are. We also have the true bicultural. That means that they're immersed in real time, literally every single day, depending on what they're doing. And then we also have bicultural and evolving, which is reconnecting with advanced opportunities that they can get in their career. And then we have All American Hispanics, that it's essentially they've embraced fully the American culture, but they have maybe physical traits or things that they like or honor about their culture. So it's really important for us to take a look at who do we have represented, because the best way for us to help and make change is to make sure that we're serving our Latino community and we meet them where they are. So it's really good for me to know this, because if I want to talk with one specific Latino, I cannot just use all Spanish. And we see this over and over again. If we're talking about elections and campaigns to increase voter registrations, just to give you an example, it's important for me to know this because I need to have different campaigns that support and serve each one of these different Latinos and how they identify themselves. So when we're talking about what makes us unique and how complex we are and some of the challenges, I feel like we sometimes forget that in order for us to make change, in order for us to grow and have specific initiatives and have these conversations and make power, we need to understand where we are. And I know we've heard our grandparents and our parents and many people say, if you don't know your history, you're going to repeat it and all of these things. But it's really, really true. We cannot make change for Latinos if we do not discuss the challenges that we face, how we see ourselves, how we're seen, and then how can we come back and challenge that notion. So I want you to introduce, this is the professor in me, I'm sorry, but also you're welcome. If you haven't heard this concept, Borderlands, I want you to introduce to this framework. It's a concept used in cultural studies, specifically when we're talking about the different experiences. When we're talking about the Latino community, it's even more important. So we're going to talk very high level about this. If you want to have a side conversation about this, I'm happy to connect. But I find it important when discussing Latino studies because it helps us understand some of the challenges that we face and our resilience, which is so important and a unique value proposition that we carry as a community. So, if you haven't heard about borderlands, it's a concept brought up by Gloria Anzaldúa. She's a Chicana feminist writer, and she talks a lot about the psychological experience living in between cultures. When we're talking about the Latinos in the US, we're constantly living in between cultures. No soy ni de aquí ni de allá. When I'm in Puerto Rico, I need to act this way, but when I'm here, I need to act this way. If I'm in Harrisburg, it's one thing. If I'm in Philly, it's another one. If I'm in Allentown, and so on. So she uses that concept to constantly talk about this navigation between those two words and worlds, and also the tension that it carries, but how can it also be a really important thing for us. So when we're thinking about this concept, she talks about pros and cons, like how this navigation constantly of who I am here versus who I am there, it can hurt us because we're constantly code switching and we could be exhausted. You feel like you're not 100% yourself all the time. You could get imposter syndrome, which is so high in the Latino community, especially in the US and professional spaces where you feel like, I feel like I can do that, but then you're more qualified. So all of those elements play an important role because you're seeing yourself as the other, as they're seeing you, but you're not seeing yourself with all the power and light that you bring in. And then it's also hurtful because it can pressure you to choose one single identity, and we are not one single identity. We're so layered. But how it can strengthen us, part of the positives or the pros in this constant balance, it could be that as a result, we have to adapt and learn from different cultures in order to fit in. So that provides us with a unique value proposition with a great opportunity because we're able to develop cultural intelligence and we can problem solve faster. We can think about other people's needs in addition to our communities. It can help us build bridges across different communities. Like there's so much collaboration happening with Latinos and the Asian community and the Black African American community. Like it allows us to be able to see each other more and carry a little bit more impact. And it also allows us to be more innovative. We have so many different ideas. We've tested things. We've had to do a lot with little. So when you have more access to resources, you can think about other processes and how can that help us better. So how she talks about this, it's very, very important. It's very heavy work, but it's really important for us to think that we're all facing this. And if we're not constantly talking about or deconstructing, how can we feel exhausted? How can we make this better for my colleague who hasn't been home to Puerto Rico in 25 years because he wasn't able to afford it and go back to see his family? How can we use the information that we have? How can we use our stories to be more empathetic and grow with our community? So what I want us to do is, as you continue to work with the Latino community, or if you're a Latino, one, identify within your own life, what are those times that you're kind of like code switching and feeling in the borderlands of your culture and this other one, and then think about how that translate into your workplace, into social events and gathering. The way some colleagues expect me, for example, to represent on Latinos, but I'm just Puerto Rican. I can't talk about all of those experiences because I haven't lived those in my own. As a Latina, I've had way more privilege than other Latinos have, and I take that very seriously and with a sense of responsibility. So what I want you to do is think about, yes, we have power in numbers. Yes, we have more people breaking barriers and opening new doors, but we also have some challenges as a community that we need to work through. And the best way to heal and do those things is by working together. So what I want us to do is think about this and think about how can we become catalysts to change for our community. So one of the phrases that I love that she has is how borders are set up to define the places that are safe and unsafe, to distinguish us from them. But I also want us to talk about how that constant living in those two countries, two borders, two systems, two languages can also help us understand and grow with other communities. So think about what insights have you emerged or have emerged from the complexity that you are as a human, Or what will you change in your organization if you view Latino professionals as a catalyst for innovation and change and increase the capital for your organization? Those are really important things. So like I said, our identities are layered. If you haven't seen this before, this is the axis of privilege. It's an intersectionality framework used to talk about our identity. So when we're talking about our Latinidad, like I said, we're so diverse. And if you're not Latino, you're still so diverse. We are talking about things that makes us different. We're talking about gender, race, class, profession, if you're able to have kids or not have kids, if you have a disability or not. Like all of these things also add more power and carry a lot of weight into how we see our community. So for example, if you're a Latina in tech, you're just not bringing your Latino perspective. You're bringing, your age, your experience, whether you had access to higher education or not. All of those different elements add into the complexity of your Latinidad, and those can be used as our competitive advantage. So when we're thinking about this, I want you to think about, yes, we have all of these things that we don't have, but there's all of these other things that we do have, and how can we use that to drive innovation, growth, and solve complex issues that our community is currently serving? Like I said, we're diverse. There's so many things. I'm not going to go into each one of these different classifiers, but I want us to think really hard and say, how can having multiple identity types lead us to participate in power structures that oppress us? Or how does this affect our storytelling? Or how can we rethink or adapt that narrative? So when we're thinking about Latinos, I want us to think about all of these different layers and how we can use all of that as our competitive advantage. So why organizations need Latinos and how can we unite together to be a unified front? I have 4 pillars to kind of like do a recap on how we're seeing this. It's one, we're economic powerhouses. I talked about numbers a lot today, but we have 4.1 trillion that demonstrate market leadership and consumer behaviors or consumption that actually shape the growth of the economy. We navigate multiple worlds with ease. I talk about borderlands. We are very able to navigate between different cultures and be able to adapt and grow and lead. We bridge traditions with innovation. That's something really, really important about our Latino community. We always carry our traditions and honor the history of what has been done before us, but we're also ready to change and to break patterns that are not healthy. And then we also have, this amazing thing, which is one of my favorite parts about being a Latino, is that it's very community focused. You might not have anything, but if I have something, you will have something too. We think beyond individual success, and that's one of our core differentiators from other communities. If I think about, obviously, as a Puerto Rican, Hurricane Maria, a couple years ago, it was very hard to see not only the devastation. Yes, it's a terrible experience that we're still recovering from, but one of the most beautiful things was to see, if I only had water and you had rice, I'll give you water and you give me rice. We always think about the power of the collective. And today I'm doing a call to action to all of you. We have the data, we have the numbers, we have the power. We need to use it to our advantage. We need to have conversations and make sure that we connect with the right people. So my question to you is, how can we capitalize on our collective strength? Knowing that we have numbers, there's data to back it up. We have artists and people in positions of power leading the way. That can look like many different things. I just have high level here, a couple of things for you to see. If you're a government leader, how can I make change and capitalize on our collective strength as a Latino in politics or a Latina in politics? It could be designing policies that leverages the Latino economic contribution. It could look like advisory structures that reflect our different cultural segments that are the top communities in terms of the Latinos across the nation. It could look like the recognition of naturalized citizens, unique perspectives. For corporations, we could talk about market strategies that are engaging, our complexity, not what people call multicultural marketing, but it should be just marketing. Technology partnerships with Latino innovation leaders. Again, we have different histories, and that makes us so unique and so excited because we see things differently. Authentic cultural competency beyond translation. Just because I have something available in Spanish language, that does not mean that I'm inclusive. Am I able to provide that access to the people where they need it? Am I translating literally, or am I actually spending time to know what words are important for those specific communities depending on their access to education, to resources, and technology? If I'm a small business owner, how can you leverage and channel the power of your authenticity and use that as a strategy for growth? There's tons of marketing agencies in the world, and in the US even more. But what makes me different and my team from anyone else is that we are authentic and true to who we are. I'm not going to do what everyone else is doing. It's not going to work. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to share my perspective. If you want to do a multicultural campaign, I need to see that you actually want to talk the whole year, not just on Hispanic Heritage Month, that talks about what we're actually doing. Adapting and innovating with Latino who are making changes, community center growth approaches, having collaborations with agencies and other people who are doing good work. If I'm a Latino professional in general, how can you use your story and your culture to bridge the gap with other people in the company or like in your organization that do not feel safe sharing about who they are and their Latinidad? How can we use AI as an advantage for our community and be able to give them access to things that they didn't even know were possible? So what I want us to do is have a conversation on how can we do this better? All of you here have amazing power, have amazing connections, and it's all about what we can do for our own. So my homework for all of you, and we can have kind of like a Q&A now if some of you have questions and if we have time, but I want us to talk about what step will you take today to turn our collective strength into a lasting impact. I want you to think about your roles. And I know some people say, well, I'm not a politician or I'm not a CEO, so I don't have power. That's a lie. We all have power. We all have access to technology, the majority of us. So whatever you can do, even if it impacts one person, that already contributes to the growth and the betterment of our community. So we can ask a question for all of you, but also if you have questions, we can have that conversation now. But I do want you to be able to say today, what are you going to do different? Like, how are you going to show up for our Latino community? What are some of the things that you think could be in your power to make that change? Hector, I don't know if we have time for Q&A. I don't know how you want to handle this structure, but I thought it would be kind of like a nice segue to I bombarded all of you with data. I bombarded you with a couple of frameworks and things on how I'm thinking about our future as Latinas, but I think it would be also important if we have time to talk about maybe some of the challenges that people are experiencing or how, some of their ideas are being kind of like in the back end and thinking about what we can do together.
So, we do have a few minutes for maybe a couple questions here and there. I don't see any in the chat, but if somebody does raise their hand, we'd be happy to have you interact here.
Okay.
So we have Andrea Perez. Please feel free to ask your question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk and also to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission for providing this space for the community, just kind of like have these conversations that are very much needed. I was wondering on a very kind of like focused angle for Latinos that are based in Pennsylvania with kind of like some elections coming up, some local elections, which elections or which kind of like events would you recommend that Latinos who want to have some change and see some impact to be active on?
That's a great question. I think regardless of the year, there's always an opportunity for us to talk about our power and also our responsibility to educate ourselves and to connect with people that have the right information to make decisions and make change. I think the most important thing for our Latino community is we need to provide them with access to the content, to why it's important for us to vote. I think that's going to be really important. A lot of people focus on kind of like the main presidential campaigns for like those general elections, but the local elections are equally or more important because you are having a say about what happens in your backyard. So I would say, what can Latinos do? One, insert themselves in those conversations. Two, if you're not a Latino and you want to talk about the impact of this, I know the Pennsylvania has done amazing campaigns. I was part of some of those in 2016 for the Everyone Votes PA campaign. And there's a lot of work focusing on educating our Latino community on the power that it carries when you vote. So I would say to all of you, please vote. This is a PSA. It's not a sponsored advertisement, but it's very important that we use our voice and power to be part of those conversations because it does impact us directly. What we can do watch parties together. We can do a game night with our friends and talk about, okay, this is what's happening. These are the candidates. You know, what are their policies? Which ones of those impact our Latino community directly and which ones not? So that we can get a little bit more familiar. We need to do our research. We need to do our due diligence. And I think with the era of misinformation, again, my professor hat on, I see a lot of students and people that they take their news from TikTok. That's not real news. So I would say to all of us in our Latino community, we need to do better. We need to also use our positions of power or of influence to educate on the power of this, on what this means for you and your generations and the future of your legacy. So I would say there's so many things that we can do. We can do some of those simple at the lower level with our friends and community, but if you have some sort of influence, you can talk about this, you can educate people, and you can provide opportunities in which they can see really the impact of voting. And I think when we showcase data, I'm a fan of data and numbers, not because it's the end all be all, but it does tells us something. If we do not make decisions that are good for us, other people are going to make it for us. And I think that's pretty evident.
So I see we have two additional questions here. So it'll go Matthew and then Director Garcia.
Perfect.
Yes, hi, my name's Matthew. I live in York County, and I live on, speaking of borderlands, I live in the borderlands of Adams County and York County and Maryland and Pennsylvania. I'm going to admit a vulnerability here. I run a group called The Valley, the Indivisible Love Movement, which is all about intergenerational, interracial, moral interfusion on issues to build what Martin Luther King called the beloved community, as everybody in this chat is aware of. One thing that we've struggled with, and we have LGBT representation, NAACP representation. We try to be as intersectional as possible. At the same time, and perhaps, and I know I'm coming from a position of privilege, and I hope this doesn't come across as, you know, bitching and moaning. We've had a heck of a time reaching out, and I have Latino and Hispanic friends and connectors, but I find, and this may be my bias, I find the Latino Hispanic culture, at least in my neck of the woods, you know, no culture is monolithic. LGBT is not monolithic. Black is not monolithic. Whites are not monolithic. But Latino and Hispanics in my neck of the woods, I have a heck of a time connecting with them to organize. And I do team building, organizing, consulting. And maybe it's a personal failing on my part, but I find that the community baffling and dazzling and beautiful and gorgeous, a gorgeous mosaic. But goodness gracious, in terms of organizing, I was just at an organizing event a few weeks ago, and these are progressives from all over Pennsylvania. There wasn't, I think there was one Latino among us. And I really fear, and I come from a progressive angle, and I know it's nonpartisan, but in terms of organizing around issues, how do white people from privilege like me, how do I do a better job connecting in in an earnest way that lets prospective connectors work on an even playing field of respect and appreciation, where we can work together to get things done.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing your story and some of the things that you've been navigating. I think probably my solutions will be very simple, maybe too simple, but I think it would probably help you. So when we're thinking about events and programming and having a lot of buy-in from Latino communities, I think one, we need to take a close look at the current landscape, whether it's political, social, economic, all of those factors definitely make, an impact when we're deciding that. So if we're thinking about your county and if we're thinking about the current demographics and the current, for example, political landscape, I'm pretty sure that this year definitely changed a lot of things for the Latino community. And I know there's been conversations with other states, organizations, and corporations, even discussing, do we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month? Some Latinos are saying, I won't show up because I'm scared, So I would say definitely let's pay attention to the landscape, because that gives us a lot of information. We might say, I don't know why you're not showing up here because I'm creating this for you, but their priorities or their fears are others. So maybe that's not what they need. So I think my first recommendation would be to have active conversations with people in the community and say, what do you need from us? We know that we're not you. We know that we can never understand what your community has gone through. We want to make change, and we want to utilize some of our influence and privilege to change things around in our community. What do you need from us? So I think that would be able to give you some real knowledge on what they're struggling, what their challenges are. You can ask, we try to do this event, but we only have one Latino. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the event? Do you think it's because of this decision, or what's happening? So I think that will give you a little bit more information for you to conduct like an informal audit on why are you not resonating with this? Because maybe it's not that they don't want that. Maybe they don't need it in that way. Or maybe it's being received performative. Or what is the outcome or the goal of this? Am I only doing one event, during the Hispanic Heritage Month? Or do I have the same event repeated throughout the year? That also tells a message. So I think, one, don't say no to continue to do this work. It's so important. And we need people like you to continue to make change and open doors for those of us who cannot open those doors ourselves. To make sure that you listen to the community consistently, and that you also maybe evaluate what other groups are doing with the Latino community in other cities or other states that have been working out for them. How can you partner and maybe do something for them? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I feel like sometimes we feel like we have to do it all, but there's a lot of other people doing amazing work for this. And maybe we can just kind of like divide and conquer, or like unite and brainstorm. So I think that would be important. I think it would be important as well to ask yourself and the organizing committee, why are we doing this event? What is the outcome? How is this going to help long-term to our community? Maybe what they need is not that. So again, having active conversations, it sounds very simple, but when we do a lot of equity work, you realize that sometimes it's not overly complicated. It's something very simple, and maybe what they need from you could be used in a different capacity that could be more influential. So I would say to all of you who are trying to make change and help our community continue to do so, ask for other Latinos or other community pillars what has worked for them. Ask your own community, what do you think you need and why didn't you show up here? Do you have any fears? Like, how can we help make change for that? And I promise that things will change. But again, take into account our current reality, the landscape, challenges. Different communities have different issues as well, whether it's access to the language, whether it's access to being able to pay or afford a babysitter. Maybe I can't do that and I would love to. So maybe I can bring this to you. Again, having conversations I think will help you and everyone else be able to figure out, we assume things. And I think one of the phrases that I shared earlier, we do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. We have the best intent, but if we don't really understand that, it's not going to work. I can say I'm all inclusive, but then I have a building and it doesn't have a ramp. So if someone has a wheelchair, they can't get in. I'm not inclusive, even though I said I am, So having active conversations, listening to our community, I think that's going to make a difference. It sounds simple, but I promise, I think it will make a difference.
Thank you.
We are running, a little bit short on time, so
Okay.
we're not necessarily going to be able to take any additional questions because we have to close up here. So before we do close up, I'd like to also inform you that we have another Hispanic Heritage Month event through this Lunch and Learn series called My Journey Through America by our very own Vice Chair of the PA Human Relations Commission, Dr. Raquel Yeinst, on Monday, October 6th from 11 a.m. to noon. So I have just posted the link in the chat for those that would like to register to the event. And before we close, I'd like to provide the microphone back to our executive director for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Hector and Angela. Great presentation. I'm going to pass the social justice baton over to my boss, who's the chairman of the PHRC, a person that I've worked with, along with all the commissioners, but a person I've worked with spiritually and intellectually for the past 7 years and 5 months. Chairman Bolstein, I think it's appropriate for you to have the last word, sir, if you're still in this space with us.
Edie Laster, he just had to sign off, so he is not with
Okay.
us. He just signed off
Okay.
about 1 minute ago.
All right. So I'll just end by saying, Angela, you know that your presentation is buzzing anytime our chairman, who is a managing partner for Fox Rothschild, is able to be in this space. And so we continue to be inspired by your work. Social Justice Public, shout out to Hector for once again organizing this. And Hector and Director Brothman will be following up with you because this presentation, I believe, needs to also be presented to our full PHRC commission during a public session of either our October or our November PHRC monthly commission. For all of those of you who tuned in today, thank you so very much. And just thank you for being present throughout. And I would say to the gentleman who asked that question to you and your response, I heard your heart. All of these conversations are difficult, even for those of us who are people of color. We all suffer from a paralysis of silence where words get stuck and we don't know how to literally fight through some of those difficult conversations. So whether we're white, whether we're black, it's really about what he said and what you presented here, Angela. It's really about that beloved community. That beloved community is not inclusive of one particular race or ethnicity. It's part of the human race. Have a great day, everyone. And once again, continue to soar for justice for those of you who are at the PHRC and those of you who are in the social justice space. Take care.
Thank you so much.